Hello, I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar today. This is one of the many webinars that we do to discuss some of the major issues that confront us. And of course, today, the big issue that's confronting us is the pandemic of COVID-19. And all of us are looking at ways that we can cope emotionally, especially if we're in social isolation with this crisis. And we're going to look at two ways in which we can do that. The first one is how we develop resilience. How do we look to the future positively instead of looking to the future with a great deal of anxiety? And to help us with that, we have Katie Davis, who has done quite a lot of work on resilience. And the other thing we're going to look at is mindfulness, how we can be mindful. And that means how we can become aware of the moment, how we can enjoy every moment of our time. And to help us with that, we have Harriet Piercy. Now, Harriet is a life coach, and she's done a great deal of work on mindfulness, and she's going to talk to us about that. Anyhow, let's get started with the interview. And the first thing that we ask both of them is to tell us a little about themselves.
So one of my other areas of interest has become resilience. One of the reasons for that was actually from having done a survey at work many years ago, and it was one of those ones where you kind of had to identify your particular character traits, and I actually came out very low for resilience, which immediately alarmed me, and I thought, oh, perhaps there's something I can do about this. And since then, I spent a lot of time reading about the subject area and looking at ways to improve resilience. And last year I gave a talk at my professional association. So in my day job, I'm actually a librarian and knowledge manager. And at our professional association conference, I gave a talk on resilience last year, which I then turned into an article. I'm also a fundraising volunteer for Samaritans, and I've also done training in mental health first aid at work. So it's an area of particular interest to me.
Okay, well, that tells us something about yourself. And what about you, Harriet? What's your background?
Oh gosh, where do I start? I've started as a very young mum, the age of 18, and then from that, suffered severe depression and anxiety. So I've been in a position of being a service user, so to speak. So much so that I was almost sectioned, so I was very, very depressed. From having children, moving forwards, I decided that I wanted to learn a lot more about myself, my condition, and why I was feeling the way I was. So I decided to start studying, and my overall studies, to cut short, lasted about 7 years. So I started studying anatomy and physiology, got a diploma in that. Then from that, I wanted to learn more about how the human body works and how we respond to stress. So from that learning, I then the reflexology, looking at holistic interventions, and wanted then to learn more because that was just scratching the surface. So from that, I then did a foundation degree in counselling and psychotherapy, which taught me a lot about lots of different diagnoses. And then from that, I then went on to do another foundation degree in life coaching. And in between this, I've done voluntary work working in a mental health care home privately. I became an activities coordinator, so I've had a lot of hands on it. And then furthermore from that, I've then developed my own charity. But my charity isn't for mental health, which people might think is strange, but it's actually for disabilities. But anxiety can now be classified as a disability, so to speak. So it kind of falls under the umbrella.
Okay, well, let's talk about that a bit later as we will. Yeah. But Harriet's come on because she is a life coach and she works in the area of mindfulness. And Katie has told you that she has some experience in resilience. Katie, I mean, resilience is about learning to cope in spite of the setbacks you have in life and building emotional strength. Is it that, or is it more than that?
No, I think that's a really good summary, actually. And it was one of the first things I looked at is what do we mean by resilience? And I think, sometimes people say, oh, this person's really resilient. There's almost an assumption that they managed to push those emotions aside. But I would say that actually resilience isn't about ignoring those emotions. It's about acknowledging them and still being able to function in spite of those. And there was a really good quote, actually, in Nelson Mandela's book, The Long Walk to Freedom, in which he says, I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but it's he who conquers that fear. And I think that's like a really good summing up of it. I don't think it's about pushing emotions away, and that's, you know, Harriet knows about this as someone has experience with anxiety. It's not necessarily about ignoring that, it's about acknowledging those feelings, but being able to still carry on in spite of that. And I think that's something that's particularly important at the moment, given that it's quite a scary time for everyone. You know, people don't really know how this is going to pan out. It's very unusual circumstances that we're all stuck inside at the moment. But I don't think we want to ignore that that's happening. We're all aware of that. We don't need to ignore it or pretend that life's going on as normal, but we all have to find a way to function through it.
And Harriet, I mean, you're involved in building emotional strength as well, but you do it through mindfulness. Now, is that different from resilience, and what is mindfulness?
I was just going to say that very much what Katie was saying kind of echoes the principles of mindfulness, which is being aware of what's happening around you and being in the present moment and actually accepting everything for what it is now, which is kind of the fundamentals of mindfulness. So it kind of fits hand in glove with resilience in some respects, because if you can adopt a mindful way of thinking or a mindful way of living your life, then you're actually accepting situations and actually building resilience without perhaps even realizing it, which I think I've kind of done over time, given my own personal circumstances and sort of my history. So it's interesting to learn from Katie actually what she's just said. So yeah.
Okay, but I mean, at the present time, a lot of people are in fear and they're in anxiety. They're afraid of catching the virus. They're afraid of social isolation. They're afraid that life is changing for them totally. How important do you think it is to have a technique of coping in a time like this, and especially at a time like this? Katie?
Yeah, I mean, it's essential, really. The tools that we're going to need to get through this period. And I think one really good one is mindfulness. In fact, I mentioned that in the article that I wrote. So, you know, I think, like Harriet says, these things are hand in hand. Resilience is the skill that we want to build. And I think mindfulness is a really important tool in that. I think there's a lot that can be said to do about changing our mindset in general. And no doubt you'll come on with more questions about some of those tools as we go on through the interview. But I think it's something that it's really important for people to work on. And if this is the first time people have really thought about it, I mean, this is going to serve them well in the future as well. You know, if people get through this, you know, we all, at some point during our lives, we're all going to experience some kind of difficulty. You know, it's true that some people may be luckier than others, but, you know, at the end of the day, we're going to experience some, you know, relatives passing away, you know, problems at work, you know, interpersonal relationships. It happens to everybody. So, you know, it's good to build these skills before it happens. But if you haven't up till now, now's a really good time to be learning those skills, ready for the next time.
Yeah, I mean, so in learning those skills, I mean, you're trying to build emotional strength. How does mindfulness, Harriet, you know, create or develop emotional strength?
I mean, it's not just mindfulness is a kind of a way of living. So if you can develop that skill, then you can then implement it in parts of your life. So it's kind of it's not something that you can then go and sort of learn overnight. It's got to be kind of, it's a bit of work with it, because what you're actually doing is you're actually changing your thought processes and the way that you respond to situations. So in relationship to what's happening now, you would be looking at how you're reacting to hearing bad news or traumas, so to speak. And like Katie mentioned, we all will unfortunately go through changes in our life and different traumas as we grow. It's part of our living and part of human nature and part of development. But it's how you then look at the situation and how you perceive the situation that makes all the difference, because we're all governed by our thoughts every single day, but we don't have to be ruled by our thoughts. And that's what people then need to learn. You don't have to, you can accept your thoughts and listen to them, don't dismiss them, because that's part of mindfulness. It's not dismissing thoughts, it's actually hearing them, accepting them, but not putting any kind of stigma to them or judgment. So you're not judging them. So for instance, in this situation, you might hear things on the news or you might see harrowing pictures, but you have more of an open mind basically about what you're seeing, so that it doesn't then create fear and anxiety and stress.
Is mindfulness about savoring each moment and cherishing it? I mean, I read a book on mindfulness once and tried it. It said what you should do is put a raisin in your mouth and eat it slowly and appreciate it. And after a while, I got tired of this raisin. But it is about savoring the moment. So how do you do that?
Because things are forever changing, so it's more the way I was taught. It's more an observational study, if you like, of your own thoughts. So you're actually observing the fact that life is going to change. It's acceptance. As human beings, we don't accept change that easily. So for some people, this situation might be really devastating, but then for other people, it actually might be okay. They can kind of manage it. It's not necessarily just focusing on one particular thing like eating the raisin. It's more training your mind to deal with things in a different way. So you're looking at things from a different perspective. You're having more of an open mind as opposed to a closed mind or a judgmental mind, which would then obviously cut you off from other experiences because you're not then giving yourself the chance to see things in a different way. And that's kind of really what mindfulness is.
That's what mindfulness is, and I think that's really valuable. And what resilience is, and I guess mindfulness as well, it's moving people from having negative thoughts, is it, Katie, to being positive and having goals for the future that makes them think that life is worth living.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's about having a growth mindset. So it's not necessarily about not having those negative thoughts, but actually one of the things Harriet was talking about was about acknowledging those thoughts and maybe labeling those thoughts. So when you have a thought like that, you kind of label it and say, oh, I recognise I'm having a negative thought right now, but it doesn't mean you have to leap from having a negative thought to catastrophizing. I think this is a typical thing that happens right now. I mean, I'm guilty of this myself. You start seeing these headlines, and you started seeing that actually healthy people were dying of this. And then you sort of saying, well, that means I could, and everybody could, and all my family could. And, it starts to build out of control. And, it's about keeping things in perspective to a certain degree, I think. One book that I read said something really interesting, saying that you're in charge of your life. Resilience requires you to take responsibility. It's about taking back control. We do actually have control over our thoughts and emotions. Obviously, these things are going to pop up in the immediacy. You think, oh, this is really scary. But, you can choose to reframe or relabel that in a particular way. And you can choose to do positive things about it as well.
So if someone said, I really want to be resilient and I'm going to give it a try, what are the first steps they should take in order to be a resilient person?
So I think one of the things that's really important is always to get the facts about things. I mean, this is a really interesting thing, actually, and particularly, I think, prevalent here where, there's a lot of fake news flying around. And also, I think you always have to remember that, the media headlines are going to focus more on the dramatic and the negative, shall we say. The headlines are always about the number of people who are dying each day, but we're not actually concentrating on the number of people who are surviving and going on to recover. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't take, the numbers of deaths seriously, for example. But I think you have to be conscious of the fact that the media has a particular narrative that they need to push, and obviously that's important because we want people to stay at home and stay safe. But it's difficult then for people to not get out of perspective, because if that's the message they're seeing all the time, that's what's being reinforced in their minds. So, be sure of having all the facts, first of all. I think don't necessarily take everything at face value. And once you have those facts, then work out what you can do about them. If that involves making a list, that's great. What can you actually do in this moment? And for a lot of us, that's actually just staying home and following the social distancing guidelines. But it may also be that you can do something more positive, like, well, if you're in a healthy age group, you're less likely to be affected. You can maybe volunteer to be an NHS responder. And doing positive things is also a really valuable thing for your mindset as well. So.
Okay, so I mean, those are the things that you want to do, but with mindfulness, Harriet, there's also a technique, isn't there, that people can follow? Is that a fair thing to say, or is it something you just jump into?
Practices of mindfulness. I mean, there's mindful meditation, so people go off and research these things. I mean, I can even share an exercise which is called the Power of Now, and it's a simple exercise which is then training people to refocus their thoughts. So this can be done while you're washing up, eating your raisin, like you said, Francis. So if anyone is interested in any of these kind of techniques, please do get in touch with you, and I can sort of forward these on afterwards. I don't mind sharing any of that. There's several different. I mean, if you've only got to Google mindfulness and anxiety and stress, and a whole host of different things will come up. So there's lots of different ways you can practice at home, and this is an ideal time, in fact, while people got this bit more time to start thinking. And I mean, for some people, they may not need to work even too hard. But for others, I mean, this is where the rest of my practice comes in, aside from mindfulness. There might be more deep-rooted issues as to why they believe these sort of things the way they do. And that goes into the psychotherapy side of things, of looking at yourself and how you perceive stuff in your own belief systems, which is a lot deeper, which is actually the area that I really enjoy more, because we are all born relatively the same. But it depends on a lot of our circumstances as to how we then develop our beliefs. And that will have an influence over how you do deal with situations as you grow. Yeah.
So, I mean, is it something you've got to stick to all the time? And I mean, you know, all of us have fads. I have fads about doing languages and give up. And I suppose I went through the fad of mindfulness, and it's not a fad, is it? You've got to tell people, you've got to stick to it.
Because that's why I was sort of saying to you, yeah, mindfulness is part of how I would work with a client or whoever, or support somebody. It's not the whole package, because it can't be. For me, I studied it at level, so I've done in-depth mindfulness, so to speak, but I wouldn't necessarily just use mindfulness in that area, because it is a discipline. It's something like, if you take up yoga, like you say, you have to stick at it to do it, because our thoughts are forever changing every day. So we're going to get the negative thoughts come back in. You're going to get times when it's really hard to maintain what you've learned. I mean, I've had CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, and I've also practiced CBT. So, and I know how difficult that can be to maintain and do. It's very hard to keep a track on your thoughts. It takes a lot of work. So in regards to somebody wants to go and do mindfulness, it's important that they have a sort of open view about what they're learning, and then maybe just apply it to everyday life, to start thinking more openly and more acceptance of situations, and less judgmental about their own thoughts and how they perceive situations.
Okay, I mean, Katie, would you say that there is a slight difference between resilience and mindfulness, and that, that resilience is about thought and mindfulness is about sensations? Or am I trying to make it too complex?
I'm trying to make it simple.
No, I think it's almost too simple. Yeah, I probably agree with Harriet on that. I think a lot of this is about building habits over time. I don't think there's a quick fix to any of it, actually. And it can be about taking maybe small steps at a time. I'm sure Harriet will think, you can't solve problems in a day. It's probably about doing these things incrementally, but you have to look at what might be small victories for you. I mean, one of the things I was going to talk about was about the way people talk to themselves. I think that's a really important thing. A lot of people have a very negative internal dialogue going on. And I read somewhere it takes between 5 to 7 positive comments to cancel out a negative. So if you can imagine it in your head all the time, the main thing you're saying is, oh, you're so stupid, that was a really silly thing to say. Oh, I shouldn't have done this. It takes a lot to actually cancel that out. So you want to be reframing things and saying, oh, next time I might do this better, rather than saying, oh, wasn't I stupid to do it this way? And that's a really hard habit to get into, and we're all guilty of it, but it's probably about just checking yourself. The next time you do that, you might think, oh, that's a bit harsh. I don't need to say that to myself. Next time I should say this. And I think the more you do it over the time, the better you get it.
Mindfulness clearly is quite important now, and resilience, because what we're finding is, with social isolation particularly, people are beginning to get depressed. I mean, not everyone, I quite like it, but some people are getting depressed by it. They're, missing the contact they have, and it's affecting their mental health. And is that something that you're finding, because you're going through this and you're talking to people online, and you're meeting people a lot, and you work with a lot of charities, you set up a wonderful Facebook group with charities. I mean, do you find that now in this crisis, mental health is a problem, and that's something that mindfulness can address?
Yeah, it certainly can help. And like I said, I'm always giving and wanting to give advice, not advice, but help to people because of having my own experiences. I think I sit in quite a good position. Like I said, my depression was severe and it hasn't just gone away. It's with me lifelong. And I know how to check, like Katie mentioned, checking your thoughts. That's a really good point there, because as humans, the way our brains operate, unfortunately, we will cling on to a negative thoughts as opposed to anything positive. We won't just accept that. So, so it's very easy in this current climate, so to speak, to grip onto negativity. And that in turn will then cause anxiety, stress, and then will obviously, for some people that will kind of maybe more predisposed than others, that will then result in depression. And that really does concern me. I mean, I've got psychotherapist friends who I talk to all the time, and I've got many other contacts in the field, regarding mental health. So therefore, we have discussions, and it is something that's very concerning for us as sort of, I hate using the word, but kind of semi-professional, so to speak, that, you're going to be wondering how this is going to affect people in the long term. And not only people with sort of anxiety and depression, but I work with obviously the special needs community. So people with autism. I mean, I've self-diagnosed autistic myself, so I can understand the additional concerns that there are for people who are autistic, because their lives are changing, their routines are changing, and that's the same for anybody, autistic or not. The things are changing, so people have got to try and accept that, and that's very, very hard for people to accept. Obviously, is this big change, and for myself personally, I don't like rules, which sounds. I can't accept rules and regulations. So the thought of having, I can't get to grips, with the fact that if I had to go to the shops, that you've got to stay outside and wait. That's really challenging for somebody like myself, because I would just burst in there normally and just go in there and get what I've got to get out.
Yeah.
So
but a rebel doing mindfulness is something to behold. I love that idea. But several people are commenting in the chat box, which is good, and saying that really what resilience is, Katie, is trying not to be negative. It's trying to not think about your problems. Now, you were saying that about being positive, but that's not easy to do. So how would you recommend, if you're going to be resilient, that people can get away from their problems? Because, if you use something like meditation, you sit there and for 10 seconds, you've got a nice blank mind, and then everything starts coming into your mind and it becomes noise there. So how would you address that?
What, myself?
Let's get Katie first.
Sorry, I thought you meant Katie. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is very difficult. One of the tools that I mentioned in my presentation last year was about visualizing how things would be if you look back in 10 years' time. And that's a really interesting one in this particular scenario. And I thought a lot about it before I came on this call, because I thought, well, actually, we don't know how long lasting the effects of this is going to be. If this, in a lot of instances, that would be true. If you just, you ask someone out and you get rejected in 10 years' time, that's probably not going to matter to you. So that's an easy way of kind of looking at it, getting things in perspective. But I mean, this is something that could affect us globally on an economic scale. We don't know whether or not the virus will go away. There's a lot of questions about that. I can't for sure say if you look back in 10 years' time, are you going to necessarily feel better about it? But I mean, I think in the meantime, aside from things like mindfulness, one of the things I find really useful is actually having positive mantras. When I was talking about forming positive thoughts in your head, actually, it might be something as simple as like every so often saying to yourself, let's do this. But it's about sort of having those positive thoughts going through your head more often than having the kind of constant negative flow. Also making time to do things you enjoy. Now, that's more difficult inside your own home, possibly as well. Especially if you're somebody who's very active and likes the outdoors. And it's true that not everybody here is going to have more time. I mean, this is another difficulty in the current crisis. For some people, we've all found we've got a lot more time. Maybe you've been furloughed, or maybe your work has just reduced as a matter of course. But there's other people who've probably got, 4 kids at home, still trying to work full time from home, and their time hasn't, hasn't increased. But I think it's definitely finding time where you can, even if that's literally 2 minutes just before, you shut your eyes at night, being able to have that time to switch off, or being able to read a chapter of a book. I think it's something to just sort of take you out of that moment. And it's finding things to break that up, I think.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, for some people, they might be able to do it on their own. For other people, they need help. And it's very difficult in this time of social isolation to go to a group to get help. So, Harriet, you've tried to address that, haven't you, by having an online session on Sunday mornings where people can come in, they can talk about their problems. A, can you tell us a bit about that? And B, is, you know, the growth of online contact, which is happening now, a way that people can engage and get the help they need?
Firstly, before I answer your two questions there, can I just say something that Katie mentioned as well about sort of affirmation? So that's something I'm trained to use with life coaching, and I totally agree with Katie with that. An affirmation sort of something that you can either think about in your own head, but you can even write it on a bit of paper, like a positive thought, to reinforce a positive thought. So that's something people could perhaps do and stick around the house. When I was going through my really bad anxiety a few years back, to sort of get myself through, I'd use sticky notes, and I'd put one above the mirror, and I'd just put like, today you're feeling well. Do you know what I mean? So they're just small little things that you can kind of do, but it kind of goes on from what Katie said. In regards to offering support online, and like you said, the group that I've sort of picked up with on Sunday, I don't know if many people follow us as a charity, but one of our groups that we had physically that we were doing, we started, was called a Zebras, because we're Zebras in adult charities, it's called Zebras Walk and Talk Group. And the idea behind that was for people to meet weekly, to go for a walk and a chat. Not necessarily to anything deep, it's literally just to sort of get together to reduce isolation, for people just to have a bit of a natter and form friendships amongst themselves, and that really started to take off. And unfortunately, when all of this kind of crisis came upon us, we were looking at alternative ways to support people. Now, I've been trained to do online counselling and coaching. However, I don't actually like it, I'll be honest, because I prefer to talk to people face to face, because I feel like when you are online, people, and I can see this in human behaviour, people hold back far more than they would if you are in the counselling room with them, so to speak. However, there has to be some sort of solution. We can't do that at the moment. I received a phone call last week from a lady who's in crisis at the moment, and I said to her, I'm going to have to wait till I can see you, because I don't want to just do it on the phone, because it might not necessarily work. And I don't like shortchanging people when it comes to supporting people. But for an alternative for the moment, what we've done every Sunday morning at 11, we've kind of said, hop into the Zebras Walk and Talk group, and we can just have a chat. And I've actually explained to people, don't discuss anything too personal. It's just more there so that people know there is someone there listening. There is someone there that's trained to listen, so to speak. If there is anything kind of that we can kind of help with, just to get people through for the time being. But obviously, in the long term, when we can return back to seeing people, that's something that I would like to do. But as you said about the online, yeah, there probably will be. I've already seen connections that I have in the coaching world that are really loving this now. They're like, yes, yeah, let's get online. We can get more online clients. But for me personally, I prefer to see people, because I feel you find a lot more comes out.
Okay, but obviously in the present circumstances we're in, online is becoming important because people can't meet. We're getting close to the end of this session of the webinar. And Katie, if people wanted to find out more about resilience, would they be able to contact you, or where would they go?
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely happy for people to contact me. Perhaps if they post under this webinar they wanted more information, I'm happy to get in touch with people. Equally, there was a number of books I read when I was writing my particular presentation article. I'm happy to, I'll post those up on Emfield Voices afterwards in case other people might be interested to read them. Again, if you've got more time in your hands at the moment, now might be a good time to download some of those onto an ebook reader and have a look at those. Actually, there's one other thing actually that I just pick up what Harriet said about the post-it notes. Another really useful thing is writing a gratitude journal. And you know, a lot of people right now might think maybe there isn't something, you know, that they can think of right now. Perhaps, you know, they do feel a bit sorry for themselves, or genuinely a situation, you know, it's got a lot of negativity in it. But you know, if nothing else, at the very top of that list, you know, if they can write "I'm alive," you know, even if it's just really small things, or you know, or that you managed to video call with your mum that day, or you know, anything like that, because it just reminds you, you know, there are positive things, and you know, we will come through this.
Okay, and Katie, no, not Katie, sorry, Harriet, how would they get in touch with you if they wanted to, join your Sunday morning sessions or talk to you further?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy. I'd actually compiled a stress management course via my life coaching. I'm quite happy. I mean, I was charging, but I'm quite happy to give that away for free in these times. So if anybody would like access to my stress management course, it could involve perhaps a phone call chat here and there, but obviously I can't be inundated because obviously I've got my charity work as well, but I can certainly share information about that via email. Also the Power of Now exercise, like I said, which is a good powerful exercise for mindfulness. Or if you just want to chat in general, then please do hop over onto Facebook. It's the Zebras Walk and Talk group. If you join the group, then Sunday morning I'll be in there chatting. But if you want to email the charity, would be the best way to get hold of me. So shall I give that at the end, Debbie Francis, or
I'll put that up and send it to people.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that would be best. Okay. All right. Well, I mean, thank you for doing this session of the webinar. I mean, I think that's been very helpful because people need that sort of help now in the situation they're going through. And I think both resilience and mindfulness is something that people should look at. And you've talked about the similarities and the steps people can take. So I think that's been very, very useful. So we'll end this interview now.